Welcome to Dive Deep. I'm your host, Pastor Caleb Swartz, the Counseling Ministries pastor, and our goal here at Dive Deep is transformation. Our current series, Rebound, follows the transformation of Jerusalem as Nehemiah led the people in rebuilding the city. And we're excited as you hear our thoughts today on what Pastor Brandon presented this past weekend. Today we have Pastor Kyle joining us. Welcome, Pastor Kyle.
It's good to be here.
So glad to have you today. And we get the privilege of just talking through some of the concepts and topics that we heard this weekend, sharing some of our experiences. And we're excited for you listeners to hear a little bit more from Pastor Kyle. So now, Pastor Kyle, let's kick off this way. Can you share just a little bit of your background, where you came from, what brought you to Christ Wesleyan, and a little bit of what you're doing right now in ministry?
So originally what brought me here to Christ Wesleyan Church was Pastor Eric, the relational care pastor, and I was a freshman in college. So this was, 6 years ago? It wasn't actually that far along. But I met Pastor Eric in the midst of the residency fair that was going on. I knew that the program I was a part of, I would need to be a part of a residency at a larger church to be able to learn what it means to actually be a full-time pastor. So most of the churches that were out there were from the Midwest or from South Dakota. There are a lot of churches in South Dakota that are Wesleyan.
South Dakota, that's interesting.
It is really interesting.
Okay.
There are like pockets of Wesleyans. But anyways, when I was there, I was like, that's not really close to where I'm from, which is originally from the Corning area in New York.
Right.
And then I heard Christ Wesleyan Church in Milton, Pennsylvania. And I went, there's a Wesleyan megachurch in Milton, Pennsylvania? What?
I think we often on Monday morning stop and go, wait, we're this big and we're in central Pennsylvania?
Yeah, really. It's like where I grew up, there were more cows than people. So to see a
Right.
church this large has been really cool. But Pastor Eric had eventually led me here to Christ Wesleyan, and I got to come to a couple services that were here, learn about everything that was available, and the thing that really drew me to this place is a dream that I once had. I know it sounds kind of strange, but I had this dream where I was standing in Indiana where I was going to school and looking back towards the Northeast, and I just saw this huge pile of wood that was there. And I'm like, well, that's kind of strange. Why am I looking at a giant pile of wood in New York and Pennsylvania? And I looked down, and in my hands there was this little fire. And I had saw Pastor Eric, a couple other people that I couldn't yet recognize at the time, but also some that I did recognize from my home church, and they were all carrying little fires as well. And in that moment, I had heard the Lord's voice in the midst of that dream saying, with this fire, you will light this area for me. And not many people know that story or that dream, but once I came to Christ Wesleyan Church, I saw the logo, which is sharing the light.
Right.
And there was the fire. And
No
I'm like,
way.
oh my gosh, that is so cool.
That is cool.
So that's a story that really brought me to Christ Wesleyan, and that was the Lord working in the midst of that.
That's like some real Old Testament prophet vision right there.
See, I'm a little weirded out by it myself, but yeah, it was very clear, and I still remember it to this day.
Man, that's so cool. Well, I think there's a lot of validity to like God speaking to us through dreams. We know in the Middle East that Jesus has appeared to countless Muslims in dreams where they have no context, have never met him before, but he'll come and deliver his name to them. And then they go and seek him out. And, even in the psychology world, Sigmund Freud, for all his pitfalls, really felt that, the dream world was the royal highway to the unconscious mind. So and there must be some kind of spiritual connection that happens to us when we maybe are freed from our preconceptions of what can and cannot be, so our minds are free to imagine. And I wonder if it does open us up to maybe some communication from God that we don't otherwise receive. I don't know. What are your thoughts on dreams? You ever studied it before?
I haven't ever studied it before, and it really hadn't ever come to my mind even. I mean, when people said, yeah, God spoke to me in a dream, I was like, okay, well, what did you eat the night beforehand? Was it the cookie dough ice cream that was speaking to you? Because I usually get kind of weird dreams if I have too many Cheez-Its at 10 o'clock at night before I go to sleep. So, but in that one was uniquely different. Yeah. I can't even describe how I knew it was different. But I mean, this dream was 4 years ago, and it's still very vivid in my mind. And just going back and reading about Joseph and how he was able to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh, or reading about Daniel being able to interpret the dreams of, I believe it was Nebuchadnezzar at that time. So these dreams do happen. And like you had said, over in the Middle East, they're happening right now. So it's something that seems so out of reality that I think we in our Western minds tend to say, well, it's just something that's not real, so I won't put that much
we
faith
disregard
in the midst of
it. Because our Western thinking is logic and reason based, and that doesn't seem logical.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And, I've heard of a number of Christ Wesleyan attenders that I've had the privilege of knowing who have had similar dream experiences that have come true also. And, a lot of times it's not clearly defined for them, but it's just God kind of gives them a vision for what could be. And when it happens, then they see hindsight how it fit into the dream. Oftentimes it's not okay, now I have the vision, I'm going to work towards that. And here's step 1A, 1B, 2A, 2C, and it's not like a progressive revelation like that. Oftentimes it is a little bit ambiguous and crude, but I think that leaves way for the Holy Spirit to speak directly to us as we're in daily life, being dependent on Him. Because I think if God just gave you the path in a dream, then...
And where's the fun in it?
Right.
Where's the trusting God in the midst of that, too? Because ultimately, He's the lamp unto our feet and the light into our path. So we may only be able to see a couple feet of that path, but that's where the trusting God part of it comes into it, too.
Absolutely. So that was an interesting exploration of dreams that we had not intended to do at all.
Sorry about that rabbit hole. But.
Absolutely. And so what are you doing right now in your work here at Christ Wesleyan? Cue the listeners in.
So what I do right now is I'm the pastor of spiritual formation and young adults, but that also includes our men's ministry, our women's ministry, our discipleship and small groups, our baptisms and salvations. So there's a lot that I'm in charge of, but at the same time, I'm looking forward to what we can do with our ministry leadership teams and how we can get groups back up and running, especially after COVID, with so many of our groups either being inactive or going virtual. We have a big hill to climb, but at the same time, there's definitely a need for it. There have been so many people that have been connecting with me saying, hey, I want to be connected with a group.
Yeah.
And our biggest need right now is for small group leaders and hosts, those who are just willing to sit and be in the midst of conversation about the Bible, about maybe a book. Like just this past couple months, our group went through a book called Soul Shaper, which is written by a Wesleyan pastor, and it's about spiritual disciplines in our life. How can we actively become involved with those disciplines in our life so that way we can grow closer to God in the midst of that? And I'm the one who wrote the curriculum for that. If any other small groups wanted to use that curriculum, they're more than welcome to do that. But we also have these leader guides that we go through. Right now, we're going through the Nehemiah series, and these small group leader guides are actually made for leaders to follow along with and have that conversation.
Right, which makes leading really pretty simple.
Yes.
It's just facilitating conversation. It's not you being an expert. And I think that's the biggest misconception that people have.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been a small group leader for, 7 years now or so. And that the thing is, if I've done my job well, I haven't actually said all that much.
Yeah.
And so these leader guides that you put together, I know they're so useful. And what's fun is our small group had met last Sunday night, and we were talking through some of the Nehemiah stuff. And one of the topics that got raised was talking about marriage and trying to understand, Ezra and Nehemiah's take on marriage, because, realizing that Ezra and Nehemiah originally were on one scroll and they told a story. And we look at the way that Nehemiah responded to marriage of foreigners specifically, and some of the issues that were there. I think, and I think it's important for people to understand that God's heart was not against marrying a certain person because of ethnicity or race or community that they belonged to. That wasn't the heart behind God's commands in the Old Testament. The heart behind it was so that when they married, they wouldn't be led away from God. And at that time, culturally, as I understand it, most women, the mothers, were the ones that imparted culture and education and teaching to their children. The fathers were out working most of the day, and that was left to, really the homemaker, the mother at the time. And what we see in Nehemiah is that, the children didn't understand Jewish custom. A lot of them, it said that they couldn't even speak their language. And so what we see here was there really was some sort of corruption that was happening, or there was a breakdown in communicating Jewish custom and the worship of Yahweh and understanding of God at the time. And that was, I think, why Nehemiah responded so harshly. But I can't imagine, Pastor Brandon rolling down through the aisles and pulling out people's hair because they married a certain someone.
Yeah, that may not be so great to do.
Right. But, okay, so understanding that, I do want to bring it to, and our small group talked a lot about this, and so I just wanted to throw this back to you, but, what does that change for us today? Because we know that about then, how does that inform us now? And I'm sure you've seen a lot of friends moving towards marriage or in relationships and in and out of relationships.
Yep.
Knowing what God's intention is for relationships and for marriage, what have you found as far as the ability to speak into those relationships of your friends, of your family? How's that gone for you?
Yeah, one of the things that I like to discuss with those who are thinking about getting married or are in the midst of a relationship is there are 4 things that can really make or break your marriage. Those 4 things are your finances. Are you both on the same page with how you spend your money? Your family relationships. Do you actually get along with that side of the family, or are you constantly at odds? If you're constantly at odds with that side of the family, then you're obviously not going to have a great marriage because you're always going to be fighting with them. The third thing is what we're getting at here, and that is religion, what you believe. If you're both on different pages with what you believe on a spiritual sense, then you're both traveling in 2 different directions already. I mean, even before you're married, there's been a fork in the road, and the longer you go without addressing that fork in the road at its beginning, the farther and farther you will drift apart in marriage. And that's why it's so important, and why Nehemiah really emphasizes don't intermarry with these people who believe differently than you do. I mean, Brandon mentioned in the sermon too, to be unequally yoked is to go at 2 different paces. He used the example of the ox and the donkey.
Yeah, right.
I mean, a donkey is so stubborn that it may not even go at all. And this ox is constantly trying to pull and do the work that it needs to do. And how many marriages today do you see that happening?
Oh, that's
do you
so
see
true.
One person who's trying to lead their family in the way of knowing Christ, and the other person is just not on board at all?
And it, it makes me think of missionary dating, and how many people do we know? How many friends have you watched? I know I've watched a bunch who have, they understand this concept of unequal yoke. They say they do, and they agree with it. Yet I watch them go out, and because they can't find somebody that they like, right? They'll start dating someone who has no commonality in their religion or their beliefs, or maybe is even just a seeker, but is not really committed to Christ. And what does it end up doing? I can only think of one example, and they're, almost 30 years into marriage now. And the first 10, they would never do again. They'll tell you that. They wouldn't wish that on anybody. I can only think of one example where the spouse has actually been won to Christ. And I've seen a lot more go down in flames, and the person who really does follow gets drawn away, and they become cold. And I think that's what God's trying to save us from.
It'll ruin somebody's life if they don't take that seriously at the beginning. And one of the things that I'm a huge advocate for is pre-engagement counseling. Oftentimes, what we do is we'll have premarital counseling, which is very important. I highly recommend it if that's the only thing that you have at that point.
Right.
But by the time that you're engaged, there's very little that will actually convince you not to be married to this person.
Yeah.
I was one of those. I was engaged when I was a sophomore in college, and the relationship was extremely unhealthy. We were both unequally yoked. She was traveling in a totally different direction, but I told myself, we're engaged now. We can't get out of it. Thankfully, that ended up breaking off, but it was a horrible experience for that.
Right.
And if we had done pre-engagement counseling where we weren't so melded together at that point, it would have saved us a whole lot of heartache. And I'm thankful that that relationship didn't end up continuing, because if it was, I would be in a much different position than I am right now, maybe not even in ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. So. And, I'll speak to that because here at Christ Wesleyan, we offer Seriously Dating or Engaged with SDOE, which is, 10 to 11 weeks, depending on the semester, where we walk through anybody that's in a serious relationship, and we go through the foundations of how God designed relationships to be, and we challenge people to have those conversations. So if you're listening, you're interested, or you know somebody that would benefit from it, we're actually kicking off this fall, September 8th. So we'll have both SDOE, that's for, premarital, and Mr. and Mrs., which is for, hey, if you're married and you want to add some tools to your toolkit, hop into Mr. and Mrs. And I'm part of that teaching team, and actually was there from the beginning when Tab and Dave Gessner launched marriage ministry here at Christ Wesleyan. It's phenomenal. It's so much fun. So it speaks to exactly what you're talking about, though. Like, let's get off on the right foot.
Yep.
So,
and how can we best be prepared for having this marriage be a success? Because with the divorce rates being so high as they are today, or even like a lot of people that are my age, they're not getting married at all, because of the divorce rates that used to be there and the brokenness that they see.
Absolutely.
So to be well-equipped even before you're married makes such a difference, not only in your own life, but in your witness to other people's lives as well.
Absolutely. So, Pastor Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thanks for spending some of your time with us today on CWC Dive Deep. The heart of this podcast is to bring about transformation and good spiritual discussion. Be sure to spread the word so more people can benefit. And we look forward to providing you with more great content in the weeks ahead. Join us next week as Pastor Ryan shares his thoughts in the follow-up on his sermon on heaven and hell. And in case you've missed past episodes, check those out at cwc.life/dive-deep. Have a great week.